Why was Africa, with its rich history and diverse cultures, singled out for one of history's most heinous practices? Dive into the heart-wrenching reasons behind the choice of Africa for enslavement and uncover the stories that have for so long been overshadowed by the chains of the past. What factors made this continent the epicenter of such unimaginable cruelty? Let's unravel the disturbing truths together. Slaves from Africa have always been used for work. Since the 16th century, the Spanish and Portuguese had used slaves from Africa. The Atlantic slave trade of the 18th century, on the other hand, was a new kind of slavery that was much bigger than anything that had come before. The British were very important to this trade. West Indian estate owners turned more and more to African slaves to work on their farms. But why the West Indian islands were so important? Because of the new way of farming that grew in the European colonies of the New World. More and more slaves were sent across the Atlantic. As the Europeans took over the Americas, they opened up a lot of fertile land in tropical regions. On this land, crops were grown. Plantations were a new way of doing business and living. Both a farm and a business, they did both. Unlike land-based farms in Britain, most plantations focused on one crop for export like sugarcane, cotton, or tobacco. The Europeans built large farms in the West Indies. Because of how well they did, their owners decided to use the same model on other islands. The number of farmers who wanted to buy slaves from Africa kept going up. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. There are countless harrowing facts about the experiences of Africans. In some instances, they went without food for an entire day, enduring treatment even animals wouldn't be subjected to. Curious to uncover more about their heart-wrenching stories? Stay with us. The most chilling revelations are still ahead. Cheap work. To keep their profits high, plantation owners needed to grow and process sugar quickly and cheaply. They decided that African people who had been taken as slaves were the answer. Because of this, the Atlantic slave trade grew. The biggest islands, like St. Dominique, Jamaica, and Cuba, saw the biggest jumps in sugar production. By 1775, half of Britain's sugar came from Jamaica. These three islands were where most slaves in the West Indies got off their ships. The number of slaves coming to the islands grew to the point where it was on par with the Brazilian ports. David Olusoga, a historian, goes to a current sugarcane harvest to see how little has changed since slave times. At first, when European farms needed help, they tried to get native people to work for them. But these local groups were not only poor, but they also had high death rates because they were exposed to diseases from other places, like smallpox. Because they could stand up to such hard conditions and brutal treatment, especially when they fought back, they were not a good way for Europeans to find long-term labor. The British then sent their own people to Barbados to try to fill the labor gap. They set up a system of plantations that used physical labor from poor white people. But the huge amount of new land often tempted these workers to start their own farms, so they had to be paid more to keep them. This, of course, cut into the income of the farm owners. To stop this, the British came up with the idea of indentured servants. These were people, often from poor families, who signed contracts to work for a certain amount of time, like 5 or 10 years. In return, they were given food, shelter, and a way to get around. Even though they were working off alone, they were really just working for free. But this method was not perfect either. There weren't enough ready British workers to become indentured servants, especially when they were promised land that didn't always come true. The British then came up with another idea, putting prisoners to work. Instead of being killed by hanging, these prisoners were sent to the West Indies to work for a certain amount of time. Even so, this system had flaws because there weren't enough thieves to meet the huge demand for work. So the search for work turned into a circle of trial and error, and those forced into these labor systems, whether they were native or British, were exploited and had a hard time. By the end of the 17th century, African slaves were the most valuable way to get work done. So hard was this path followed that the work done by native people, British wage laborers, indentured servants, and criminals became unimportant. An illustration of slaves from Africa being taken to America by ship. Because Europeans were so racist, slavery took on a racial tone. Slavery was easier to defend when people thought about how different races were. Africans were kept as slaves because Europeans thought Africans were not as smart as them. Europeans thought that Africans would do a better job on the farms. Some people said that African slaves would be killed if the slave trade stopped. Some people thought that superior Europeans taking care of African slaves was good for them. Religion plays a role. In general, the Church of England agreed with the idea of slavery. Through the Society for the Propagation of the Gospel and farms in Barbados, it was connected to the slave trade. People who were forced to work for the society were marked with the word society on their chests. The Church of England backed rules that said slaves couldn't go to school. Also, the church was a big part of the state, so it followed the political beliefs of the people in charge. What the Bible says. Some parts of the Bible were used to defend slavery. Noah put the curse of Ham on his son Ham's descendants, starting with Ham's grandson Canaan. Christians thought that the people of Canaan moved to Africa. They thought that the curse that made Canaan slaves was the same thing that made Africans slaves. Military issues, leaders in the Atlantic slave trade came and went. From 1500 to 1600, during the first century of the Atlantic slave trade, Spain and Portugal were the most powerful military forces. They had total power over the slave trade in the Atlantic. Throughout the 17th century, Northern European forces kept trying to take over. In the 18th century, Britain, Portugal, and France were the most important traders. 7 out of every 10 slaves went to places that Portugal and Britain owned. Controlling the trade and having a strong army went hand in hand. At this time, governments put limits on which ships could deal with their colonies. Each European power limited trade within its own colony so that its own traders could do better. When the Europeans took over the American colonies, there was more trade of slaves. In 1650, the British didn't have much to do with the slave trade. By 1700, Britain had passed Portugal as the biggest slave trading country in the Atlantic. This change can be explained by the fact that Britain's military and business power has been growing. These two things helped each other grow and made each other stronger. The size of the British Empire was the first thing that affected how much trade Britain did. In the 17th century, the British took control of a large number of the West Indian islands. Sometimes Britain took islands from other European states that were in the way. When Britain took Jamaica from Spain in 1655, it was a big win. Jamaica was a place where people could stand up to the power of Spain in the area. Britain's military power allowed it to not only set up and protect a stranglehold on the slave trade, but also to sell slaves to other countries. As part of the Treaty of Utrecht, which ended the war with Spain in 1713, Britain got the Asiento. By the year 1760, Britain had 23 countries. As Britain's colonies grew in size and number, so did the number of property owners and slave traders in Britain. Britain's economy was more stable when it was directly involved in the slave trade. When the price of sugar dropped in the 1730s, Bristol stayed in the Atlantic trade by selling slaves to Spanish traders through Jamaica. Britain strengthened business. The size of a country's army and navy was a big part of how well it did in the slave trade, but it wasn't the only factor. During the first half of the 18th century, the British Atlantic society grew closer together. This made it easier for the slave trade to grow. In a shocking turn of events, Britain surged ahead and passed the Netherlands to become Europe's most important trading center. At the start of the 18th century, the number of American merchants grew quickly. During this time, a pioneering stock market and a strong national banking system also came into being. In 1712, when the Royal African Company's monopoly on the British slave trade was broken, it was a turning point. This lets a lot of traders from Bristol and Liverpool in, which started the fierce competition and helped trade grow. By the 1790s, the slave trade had hit its peak, which showed how the economy had changed a lot.